Let's return now to a conversation about radio advertising. If you actually walked into my office, you would see on a shelf here and over here all these old radios. I actually love radio as an industry. I started out a million years ago as a local disc jockey for a station, and I still believe in radio, except I'm not sure if I were selling or buying advertising time, maybe more so buying advertising time, I'm not sure how much I would invest in radio these days, and I'll tell you why and where my thoughts come from in just a second. The important thing, though, is that, believe it or not, 93% of the U.S. population does listen to radio at some point during the week. The other side of the coin, though, is that there are about 10,000 commercial radio stations, another, I think it's 1,800 non-commercial stations. So there are so many stations that, yeah, you're going to wind up listening to the radio at some point in time. It can be a very cost-effective medium for advertising because you could own that station and that platform and those listeners who tune in. One of the challenges, though, to radio is that people, button push, seek and scan, and go to a lot of different stations. So there's an audience turnover, but the turnover can be positive as well, because you are exposing your ad to lots and lots of people when you place an ad buy on a radio station, not for a single ad, but indeed for 5 or 10 or maybe 20 ads a day. And we'll talk about that as buying strategy here in just a second. Radio does fit very actively in integrated marketing communication. Advertisers can be connected to the station, to a local community, to a local product. It's a great way still to do outreach. An old-fashioned radio remote can work very well. Increasingly, of course, you can have your over-the-air FM radio station, and let's be honest, it is primarily FM these days. There are still amplitude modulation stations, AM stations, but they probably are, I think the latest data I saw, they're getting maybe 15 to 18% of total radio listening, and it's usually a large station in a major market, maybe carrying sports programming or talk programming or something along that line. So predominantly FM listening these days. It is a good way to stretch your ad dollar because you can strike some pretty good deals because oftentimes when you buy radio, even if it's a corporate-owned station, there are still local people on the ground that you're dealing with. So as I said, AM and FM, lots of programming formats. This identifies country music as the most popular, and I'm going to really kind of pick a bone with that as well. You got your textbook authors making that assertion. I would really say that country shows up as being very popular because they tend to just dump country into a single category versus adult contemporary, pop, rock, contemporary hits, all these things that are sliced and diced into much more narrow formats. Even some radio stations, they might run a CHR, contemporary hit radio, which would be the top tunes, but a particular station in a major city may say, based on audience demographics, we have a heavy urban contemporary flavor, or we have an oldies flavor to it, or whatever it would be. Country music, meanwhile, gets just lumped sometimes into one category, though we know there's traditional country, hot country, new country, classic country, all kinds of things. And that's one of the things that can make radio interesting for you as well when you're buying time, is trying to figure out what station do I buy based on an audience profile and a music format. And by the way, for you, don't ever form a bias in your own thinking about radio, television, any kind of media. Understand that when you buy advertising time or space, you're buying according to an audience that's delivered or an audience expectation that you're trying to achieve, and your personal preferences matter much less. So stations will sometimes offer syndicated or network programming. Indeed, one of the things that happens these days is that some smaller stations will use voice tracking, where the disc jockey isn't even there. It's all computer stored and maybe programmed from, if not 100, 500, or 1,000 miles away. But radio advertising, they say here it accounts for about 4% of ad spending, but wait a minute, that's not what we saw earlier, with radio doing about 8.3, 8.4% in that pie chart. I think what the truth would be is that we've got over-the-air radio ad spending, and then we do have Spotify or other streaming audio service spending as well that gets dropped in there. Who are the top national radio advertisers? Well, here from 2017, T-Mobile and Comcast Cable and Home Depot. Wow, Home Depot. Why? Probably because they're buying some talk radio spots, but they're also probably buying formats that target women 25-54 with home needs and home upgrades, more so than just somebody buying lumber. AT&T and T-Mobile, again, mobile services there. Comcast with cable and internet delivery makes sense there. You kind of run down the list. And, of course, there's Berkshire Hathaway and particular companies that they own, including, I mentioned, Dairy Queen, though Dairy Queen is still a fairly small sponsor. When you buy radio, you can buy local, you can buy spot radio that could come through syndicated programming, or you could buy network programming. And the network programming used to be thought of as, NBC, ABC, CBS, and that might be news-related programming. By the way, if you went back in the history of radio and you looked at or studied radio in the 1930s and the 1940s, and even early 50s, radio was dominant, delivering evening primetime radio programming, dramas, comedies, variety shows, and that's how most advertising on radio would have been sold. Of course, in the 1930s and 40s, it was a radio game. There was no television, and newspaper would have been your other primary competitor. Today with radio, it could be a radio network that's a sports network for football. It could be a radio network that's a sports network for racing or a talk show or something or other like that. Spot radio, again, syndicated shows. Even within that network, they may very well sell some spot buys that are placed on the network. The other thing that's a big deal to think about would be radio day parts. The most listened to day part is still morning drive. And literally morning drive is that morning drive to work time period, typically defined as 6 to 10 a.m., though in some markets they'll even talk about it starting at 5 a.m. and running until 10. And that's the most listened to time period. Afternoon drive, typically starting around 3 in the afternoon, running until 7 p.m. And by the way, at this point, I'm really speaking of our central time zone time periods. Radio listening is divided into average quarter hour. How many people are listening in a 15-minute period? And so we might figure that in terms of persons, maybe gross rating points, maybe average quarter hour share, and a share being determined by simply the total number of people who are listening to any radio station at that time. But how many are listening to a station in a 15-minute period? And one of the formulas that you can calculate is audience turnover. And turnover in a 15-minute period or every 15 minutes is not necessarily a bad thing if you're buying advertising. You buy a heavy spot schedule, a lot of commercials that run, and because the audience turns over, that is, they literally push the button or go to another station and listen to something else, you potentially expose a lot of people to your message. CUME is the total number of people who would listen, so as we think about that audience turnover, we want to know CUME persons sometimes, the total number of different people who are listening. Now, here's something that's kind of a misnomer in radio terminology, satellite radio. And I'm really speaking here of Sirius XM. And I would also, by the way, toss in Spotify, not so much satellite delivered, but as streaming audio. Technically, I'm going to contend that they're not radio at all. But if you're an advertising buyer, you might not care. But the difference, of course, between satellite radio and traditional radio and other streaming services, satellite is subscriber-based. They do have a fair number of programming choices, but it's all commercial-free music. They've got a little bit of talk programming and news programming that will include commercials, but for the most part, satellite is not that attractive to advertisers because it's typically not ad-supported programming. But when you do start to buy radio airtime, what do? Well, you figure out, who am I trying to reach? What do I want to do with this radio ad purchase schedule? And I've worked at stations in the past that honestly were not the number one or the number two or the number three station. We were strong in our audience demographic, but an ad agency sometimes will simply say, I want to buy total listeners 18 and older. I want to buy an easy way, so I'm going to identify the stations with the greatest concentration of listeners, and I'm going to buy the top 3 stations in the market. And if I were buying on behalf of a client as an ad agency, I might do that because it's the easiest way to make it work. But I look at the top stations, I then go through and I look at the formats, and I look at maybe audience turnover, I look at CUME listener reach, I figure out time periods. As a station, does it make more sense to buy morning drive or do I buy midday? I might buy middle of the day because people are listening to the radio in an office or a business location. And then the station will have what we call a rate card. And the rate card will simply talk about how much commercials cost. By the way, TV will have a rate card as well. Radio is a little bit more fixed in its rate card. TV rates will vary a little bit from week to week and program to program, while the radio card is built around those day parts: morning drive, midday, afternoon drive, and night, and then overnight, the 5 periods there. If I have access to ratings data, I'm going to look at that, and then I may go through and figure out a cost per thousand. How many dollars and cents does it take for me to reach a typical 1,000 listeners on that station? And then I negotiate with the radio station salespeople, if I'm an ad agency or a media buyer, internally within a company, and I place my buy accordingly. Now, radio podcasts have really become an interesting way to think about producing audience reach that's not traditional radio. And so that's also something that goes in the mix these days that we would talk about. It's a decent way sometimes to reach an audience. And your podcast buy, depending on the site and the way that you're negotiating it, it could be a sponsorship of a particular podcast, but it could also just be a, here's my ad, drop it into your podcast platform, and whenever somebody downloads a podcast, my ad is going to appear. And I don't really have a lot of control over it. But it's a low-cost way to reach a lot of people. When it comes to producing radio, producing a podcast spot, it's pretty easy to do because oftentimes it's just the human voice, and it's maybe a clever script that we put together, an interesting idea, or it's somebody with a strong vocal delivery, or maybe it is a creative idea that will include sound effects and some kind of payoff. The challenge, of course, is that we've got to do it well to engage the listener, to get them to want to pay attention to the radio spot. And the problem along the way is that you have announcers of various talent levels or abilities, and various levels. Even if you send out an ad to a series of local stations and say, produce this, the ad might not sound the same. So sometimes that means you'll hire a national production company and pay a little bit more for premium voice and creativity and produce the spot, and then you'll distribute it to all the local radio stations or networks or spot buy outlets to ensure that you've got a better quality ad running along the way. Well, in producing an ad along the way, again, pre-production side, I'll just mention this briefly. I find it a little weird that it's dropped into this particular chapter along the way, but it makes sense, I suppose. If you have a client and you're going to control the message, and by the way, sometimes if you're an agency, you will simply say to a radio station in a small to medium-sized city, hey, write ad copy for me, produce a spot, let me hear it, and if I like it, we'll buy. Sometimes a radio station will even produce a spot for you, and they'll call it a spec spot. Well, based on what you've told us about the client, here's what we produced for you. Do you like this? If so, let's see if we can do a deal and get advertising on our station for your client. But if you are producing the ad, again, it's this idea that you've got somebody who's in charge of the key concepts for the client. You hire the talent along the way. You book studio time. And the studio is not necessarily some big fancy place. It's somewhere where there's typically maybe one microphone, and I'm going to say a padded room, because the padded room controls sound. Indeed, those of you in the class who are in audio production know that, acoustically we want a fairly dead surface surrounding us so that there's not a lot of echo and you get the richest sound. And then once the voice track is laid down, if we have music, if we have sound effects, whatever it is, we work that in. And of course, along the way, as we're doing all this stuff and trying to figure it out, we get some estimate and we work on a budget and we figure out how much do we pay talent. And is this a one-off talent fee, meaning the talent voices the spot one time and they're paid and that's it? Or is this high-priced talent where they voice the spot, we pay them a certain amount of money, and then we agree to pay them additional money in residuals if this ad is then distributed nationwide on network radio versus local, or spot radio buys versus local, and all that gets worked into the budget as well. And ultimately, we cut the spot. We let the client hear the spot in finished form, and it's usually, as my slide shows here, and this is a slide that your textbook author included for me, but those of you in the audio production program taking this class as an elective will easily recognize a mixing board there, and it does tend to be a multi-track commercial, which just gives you the ability to drop in maybe another voice or sound effect or music, and you can adjust the finished spot in the best way possible. And it's true whether we're talking about a radio spot or even a television spot, a concept. I mentioned to you a few lectures back when I first started meeting with you that for television, one of the things, or video, let's just generally say, one of the things that an ad agency might do is to go through and initially create a layout, a visual layout or graphics flow of what a TV spot might look like. You could do a similar version of that with sample radio scripts, and you help people understand the concept behind the audio spot or the video spot, and ultimately you get it produced. And it's so much easier on the front end to try to figure out what you want to accomplish with the spot than to produce it and then go back and fix it, because that gets to be maybe not a nightmare, but it does get to be a chore. So the person who produces the spot, you could, as an advertising major, find yourself being a commercial producer where you're doing the storyboards for the video spot, or you're writing the script for the radio spot, and you're coordinating video recording of content, or you're coordinating audio recording. Indeed, if you're an advertising person and you have a pretty good set of pipes, a pretty good voice, or interesting voice characterizations that you do, you could find yourself not only writing the copy, booking the time, figuring out the concept, studying, you might not study the audience, that might be somebody else really on the buying side, but at least for the ad, you might be writing it and actually voicing it and being a part of the final production of the ad. With video spots, this part of the chapter is really to talk about production as well. 3 kinds of commercials that we normally see: live action, animation, special effects. Live action, just human beings involved. Animation, well, it's just that. Special effects is probably an ad that's a combination of human beings, but some animation or other special effects dropped into it. With any ad, audio ad, video ad, the challenge is creating a message that an audience will actually tune into and try to process. And it doesn't mean, if it's a 30-second ad, that they have to listen to it from start to finish 30 seconds every single time. Maybe there's a sting, a signature of music, or a special effect, and that alone generates top-of-mind awareness for the client and the client's product. Now, it may be that you want people to hear the full 30-second spot, but if you've got something in it that's a visual or an auditory signature, that alone can be a pretty nice way of achieving that top of mind awareness for your client, where they hear that sound, see the graphic, and then they associate that with the brand name. If you were actually going out to shoot a video spot, things that you would potentially want to be involved with on the location, the cinematographer, the videographer maybe, because most of the time it's not going to be quite so complicated to need a cinematographer. But if you were producing a major ad for a car brand, that's going to be a substantial investment, and that probably would have somebody who is a cinematographer who's scouting a location and thinking about the visuals in the commercial. And we do have famous film directors who make as much money to produce a commercial, or, by the way, we see the reverse happening, people who made a living initially as video commercial directors who jump into film because of their ability to tell a story. Lighting, a teleprompter for talent, different venues where you may shoot your video, location shooting, and yeah, that can be a nightmare. The green screen is just the special effects green screen that you guys have seen in other applications. In Zoom you can drop in a background courtesy of a green screen. Well, in all kinds of video through special effects, you can drop in through digital any kind of virtual set that you would ever want. And is that an effective way? I'm going to say yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, look at the picture here of the talent on the set with the green screen behind, and it looks pretty good. But I don't know, after a while, I think that people just maybe become a little bit more jaded, or maybe I'm just a little bit more jaded about virtual sets because I've seen far too many of those along the way. Behind the scenes, though, in the commercial production, you typically have, maybe several people who are shooting, and you have other people who are paying attention to what's going on and what's being recorded. Honestly, at the network level, a large budget level, you're going to have a sound engineer and lighting technicians and electricians and grips and all those people. Most of the time, if you're working, though, for a regional ad, or you're working for a local ad, it's going to probably be shot in a studio somewhere, and you may just simply find that you've got talent and 2 or 3 or 4 people who are part of the production beyond the talent, and then the ad will go into post-production where they'll add graphics and sweeten the audio a little bit, sweeten the video, that kind of thing. So here's the post-production side that I just referenced, where they go through and they put the commercial together. And that's really it. And I sort of hate in this chapter that, we don't spend a little bit more time on radio. But then again, maybe we've spent enough time in relation to where radio is these days. We've not talked about Spotify at all, but I would say that Spotify is one more way of reaching an audience, except that you guys know as well as I do that all you have to do is figure out whether or not your budget will sustain a commercial-free subscription. And if it does, then, there's one more form of audio advertising that's gone.